Time. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Lord, with you, Lord.
As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God may be made visible through him. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed, and came back able to see. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is," but others said, "No, he just looks like him." He said, "I am." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on a Sabbath. So when the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see, he said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him, since he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight until they summoned the parents of the one who had gained his sight. They asked him, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, for he is of age. He can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged him as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. For this reason his parents said, "He is of age, question him." So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind and now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They ridiculed him and said, "You are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from." The man answered and said to him, "This is what is so amazing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone ever opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." They answered and said to him, "You were born totally in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshipped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him and heard this said to him, "Surely we are not also blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin, but now you are saying, 'We see,' and so your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Now, of course, you can see why I have lots to say about this Gospel, because there's lots here. It's very long. I probably shouldn't say it all. I'll ask you at different points whether you want me to continue. This Gospel is on the third Sunday of Lent because we're going through the scrutinies. And it is all about seeing. It is all about light. And it is all about blindness. It is all about faith and a lack of faith. And it is all about who Jesus is. Jesus has come up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkoth. And he has said, "I am the light of the world," already a chapter ago. But again, in the beginning of this gospel, he says that he is the light of the world. He begins to heal this blind man. Oh, and by the way, he's already had a fight with all these people already. Okay, so that he's already fighting with the Pharisees and the leaders of these people. But he comes up, he's just fresh from the fight, and they come out of the temple, and his disciples say, whose fault is this? And this is a good thing to reflect on, because oftentimes we think the same as the people of the first century and the people of the 4th century and of the people of the 6th century BC, that whose fault it is, it must be my fault when bad things happen to me. It must be because of my sin. And it must be because of this man's sin. Obviously, he's a sinner because he can't see. And Jesus responds simply to say, no, here's one of the reasons that this might have happened that doesn't have to do with his own personal sin. And that is that God wants to do something here to show his works. He wants God's works to be seen. This is an example of God's permissive will. God has allowed something to happen. God is not the source of evil, but he has allowed some evil for the sake of some greater good. And in this case, it is so that his works may be seen, so that the works of God, which is the work of Jesus, right, may be seen. And it is also that the blind man may come not just to sight, but to faith. But they walk out, they have this discussion about whose fault this is, and without talking to the guy, Jesus spits on the ground, starts making the clay, smears it on his face, smears it on his face, and tells him to go and wash at the pool of Siloam. Now this is kind of a remarkable event, right? Because if somebody walked up to you, you couldn't see them coming. Walked up to you, you could hear them coming, I'm sure, walking across the sand. He walks up to you, you heard him spit a little while, or you heard somebody spit a while ago, and then he starts putting something wet on your face, right? And it says that he smeared it on his face. Another word that might be used for that is he kneaded it. He kneaded, the word that's being used for smeared, he kneaded, K-N-E-A-D-E-D, like you do bread, which is what makes it illegal on the Sabbath, right? It makes it wrong on the Sabbath because it's work. It's kitchen work. It's the kind of work, it's baking the beginning of baking, and so therefore it is not allowed on the Sabbath, especially because the Pharisees are in charge of all of those little rules that help us to make a fence around the Sabbath, which, again, I don't think it's bad to have these ideas, but we can see that they're not exactly correct in this case. By the way, the Feast of Sukkoth happens it's the celebration of the fall harvest. It is the celebration of the 40 years spent in the desert, and so they make little huts. They would make little buildings around Jerusalem so that they could stay in them, like they stayed in tents when they were on the journey. And even today, there's some customs where they do this. And it's a season of joy, right? Because God has provided for them. God has provided for them not only today and in the harvest, but God has provided for them in the desert as well. Okay? So anyway, spit, clay, water, these things are material, incarnational. This connects with Jesus, who is the incarnation. This connects with Jesus, who is the Son of Man, and we'll get back to that title a little while later, but maybe. But the other thing that it recalls is God takes the water that is springing up from the earth and has made a clay, and he shapes it into the man, and then he breathes his breath into him. So some scholars will make something of this in that they'll say, well, he was born blind. That means that there's something in his eyes that hasn't been created. There's something, and so what Jesus does is he does an act of creation. And that's why it is a God thing. It's not a doctor thing. Present company accepted, of course, right? And so from early on, this reading has been used for bringing people into the church, has been used with the rites of initiation. And so, how do we know this, or what do? We have that the man was blind from birth. That's original sin. We have been blinded from birth by original sin. They're smeared. The stuff is smeared on him. Another word for that smeared, or another way that word came to be used in the church, is that you would smear the oil onto the person's head for the confirmation and the preparation. And the man is washed. He goes to the Siloam, which means sent, and is washed, right? And that goes with baptism. And of course, also by our baptism, we are sent, right? We are sent. So the other thing that's interesting in this gospel is the Pharisees and the way that they respond throughout this. The Pharisees. Oh, by the way, that was a place I was going to stop. Are you ready to keep listening? Okay. The Pharisees, when they bring him, the blind man, now seeing, to the Pharisees, there's two ways of approaching what's going on. The Pharisees, some of the Pharisees say, well, he's working on the Sabbath. That's a sin. This man can't be from God. He's not righteous. Okay? And then there's the others who disagree, who, after this, they're not in the story anymore. It's only the ones who disagree who stay in the story. They say, well, how can somebody work a sign like this? And if you remember, John's gospel he calls it at different places, the book of signs. So there's signs. He does signs. He doesn't talk about miracles like some of the other books do. It talks about signs. What are they signs of? They're signs of who Jesus is. And so these people say it's a sign and not a sin. It would be a contradiction for someone in sin to make a sign. And what's more, to make a sign that's never been done by anybody before. right? People have been healed of blindness before, but people have never been healed from having been born blind in the Scriptures. We don't see that anywhere in the Old Testament. So, after that, they take him, the people who did not believe, they go to talk to the man to ask if he had been born blind. They don't believe that he had been born blind. And so they say, well, if there's no miracle, there's no sign. If he hasn't been born blind, then this isn't a miracle. This is a charlatan, right? This is somebody who just he's able to trick the man or something like that. So let's check. Say, yep, he was born blind and he is our son. Who did this? Why did they do this? How did he do this? We don't know. And they say this because they're afraid. They say this because they're afraid that they're going to get thrown out of the synagogue. And remember, the synagogue is the center of religious life for most Jews because they don't live in Jerusalem, right? The Jews in Nazareth, there was a synagogue there. There was only one temple in Jerusalem, but there were synagogues all over the place, and there were even synagogues around Jerusalem so that they could gather and they could meet and they could pray. So they're going to be thrown out, and so they're afraid not because they're going to lose their ability to go to church on Sunday, but that means they're going to lose all their people, right? They're not only going to lose the ability to go to church on Sunday, they're going to lose the possibility of going to breakfast on Sunday, right? That's how some people think of it. Well, so they find out that, well, he was born blind, so therefore there was a miracle. So their first premise is that if there was no miracle, there was no sign. And their second premise was if he was not born blind, then there was no miracle, right? And so we have the two premises, and the conclusion that they draw we find when they bring the man born blind back again, after the parents say, okay, so ask him. See, they're more willing to lose their son than to lose their circle of friends. Now, what does that tell you? And their fear is contrasted with his faith, his courage. So their conclusion, as he comes back into the room and they say, praise God, we know that this man was a sinner. Well, how do you know that? Well, you see, we've got it all worked out. Premise 1, premise 2 leads to the conclusion. Except that it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. They have found something that isn't there. They continue to believe what they believe, even though the evidence points to something else. And we see their lack of faith. And it's so obvious that a man who has not been in their circles, right? He's been a beggar. He's been blind from birth. He's been outcast from birth. And he says, basically, he says, I don't know what you people are talking about. He did heal me. He did cure me. Maybe it's because you want to be his disciples. Maybe it's because, it mystifies him that they're... Oh, and by the way, John clues us into this because in John's gospel, he talks about the Jews. Okay? Now, who are the Jews? The Jews are the people who are opposed to Jesus, especially in Jerusalem. And guess who are the Jews in this story? Well, we have his neighbors who question him first, the man born blind, his neighbors, and then we have the Pharisees who question him. And then of those Pharisees, the Jews begin to call his parents in and question them. And then it says that they call him back. So we're talking about the same line of people, right? It's rather a measure of their opposition, the way that John is referring to them in this passage and in this gospel. Now, remember I told you that Jesus is the light? Jesus said, I am the light of the world. What does light do? Light reveals the truth. Light also reveals judgment. And these Pharisees are now under the judgment. Because even though the truth is that Jesus has healed this man born blind, that the testimony is really clear, they continue to believe that Jesus must be a sinner. They continue to believe that this miracle that's never been done before was done by a sinner. And so they are blinded by the light and unable to see what is obvious given what has occurred. Jesus says to him, and not only that, they resort to an ad hominem, right? So they say, this man's a sinner. And the blind man says, well, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not, but I know that for sure that he healed me. How does a sinner heal me? You people can't see that he can't be, that this can't be? And they say, you have been a sinner from birth. And they kick him out of the synagogue, right? They attack this man at that point. They attack the man, not the argument, but the man, because they have to hold on to what they believe, which is false. Because the truth has been revealed by the light of the world, and because the truth has been revealed and they have refused to believe it, they have been revealed as to who they are and what is in their hearts. Who calls everybody sinners? Who calls everybody thieves? Who knows everybody who's thieves and sinners and whatever else? Well, we very frequently look around and say, and accuse others of the sins that we are guilty of, right? Because it makes us feel better, well, I suppose. But the man goes from physical blindness to spiritual sight. And we see this in the final act of this, or the second to the last act. I skipped ahead to continue to talk about the Pharisees. But the man born blind now meets Jesus. And he hears him again, but for the first time, he sees him. And he doesn't just see him with his new eyes. Jesus says to him, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, in John's Gospel, the Son of Man is the incarnation. The Son of Man is God incarnate. And the blind man says, well, who is he so that I may believe? And Jesus says, he is here. You have seen him, and you are speaking to him now. And then he says, I do believe. And what is the result of his belief? He worships. The result of his belief is that he worships. He has already given testimony, but he worships. I do believe. And he doesn't just say, I do believe. He says, I do believe, Lord. When his neighbors ask him who has healed him, he says, the man called Jesus. When the Pharisees ask, who do you think this guy is? He says, a prophet. But now finally at the end of the gospel, when he is before the Lord, he says, I do believe, Lord, and he worships. Now that act of worship bears some reflection about what John might be saying in a world that says, well, doesn't really matter how I worship or what I worship or that I worship. But the proper response is that. And that, my friends, I didn't ask you if you wanted me to stop a couple more times because you looked kind of interested, but that is all I have to say.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Do you want to ask it online?
Not necessarily. Unless you want me to.
Well,
Well, the Jews, the Pharisees, were charged with keeping holy the Sabbath, which is really the cardinal commandment that kept the Jewish nation together.
right.
And they had no authorization themselves to change that.
Mhm.
Jesus, by his act, healing this man on Sabbath was saying that he could change the Sabbath because he was God.
Mm-hmm.
But that would take a tremendous leap of faith for the Pharisees to believe that.
That's right.
They were really at a disadvantage because of their position and their training.
Yes.
So I feel sorry for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
That comes up again, time and time again, the Sabbath problem.
yes. And I think we can feel sorry for them. And we can feel sad for them, and we can see their disadvantage. However, at the same time, they knew the scriptures,
Right.
and they knew the Messiah was coming, and they not only did they fail to recognize him, but as this gospel shows,
They choose not.
they choose. That's right. They reject him when it's plain enough that a blind man can see it. Yeah. So no, I don't think we should not have any sympathy. However, when you add everything together, and when you're taught by Jesus for 40 days after the resurrection, right, and then that is passed on, then we begin to say, hold on. There comes a point where, if you don't believe, you have made a choice. If you aren't willing to say that Jesus is who he says he is, then yeah, you would be right. He wouldn't have that power. But if he is who he says he is, then he certainly does. He certainly does. That brings us back, of course, to Lewis and others who say that he's either a maniac, he's either a charlatan, a maniac, or he's the Messiah. I think the first one, madman. It's 3 M's. A madman, a maniac. No, not a madman. Well, anyway, he's a liar, or a lunatic. A lunatic, a liar,
Or our Lord.
or the Lord. That's right. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. I knew there were 3. There was an alliteration there. Okay. Anybody else want to ask any questions online?
Isn't this like Tobit, the healing though, of the eyes in Tobit?
That is the example of the person who was blind, who is healed. But he was not born blind, you see. That was from laying underneath a fence, which in itself is kind of an interesting story.
There's been other miracles where people who have been blind and can see. And at Lourdes, there's a miracle where someone does not have what do you need in your eye? The iris. They do not have an iris but can see.
Mm-hmm.
That's a profound miracle
Mhm.
there.
Mm-hmm. But of course, it's the